The current 2-week sitting of the federal parliament, as we know, wrapped up today, and we might have seen the last question time for this Albanese government as we head to an election. Only the Prime Minister, of course, and his closest advisors know the likely date, and even they might not have yet decided on the day. And potential interest rate cuts next Tuesday could have a big influence on when it happens. But it seemed to me there were politicians in Canberra today who were heading home and they were glad to go. Many of them thought they would not be back until after the election. Now, however, at least 3 things this week that happened point, I think, to an election earlier rather than later. And at least one of those events would indicate that the Prime Minister is steeling himself for the worst possible outcome for us Australians. A minority Labor government being forced into a horse trading compromise between Labor, the Teals and the Greens. Can you imagine what a horror show that'd be? And there they were, Tuesday night, all the Teals plus the independents like New South Wales Di Lee, who apparently was a last-minute invite. She told Laura Jays on Sky today that incredibly, all it was some bizarre cocktail party.
I thought, there was going to be some kind of conversation. Just, hello, have some, I had a glass of mineral water, had some, little nibblies, finger food, but got to see the lodge, which is great. It was the first time to be in the lodge for me and to hear about the history of the lodge and the various Prime Ministers who've actually been there. So there was no talk of minority government? Nothing, zilch.
Bizarre. Now, obviously, the Prime Minister was never going to drop the election date to this little team of potential election stalemate-busting crossbenchers, but there is no doubt this was soft diplomacy at its best. Show off the lodge. Lee revealed she had never been there before, and they actually got a history lesson. That was hint number 1. Then yesterday, 2 more signposts that we might be closer to an election than we think, to finding out when we get to vote. Now, we had the bizarre sight of the Prime Minister yesterday standing in front of the regional airport of Merimbula with a bunch of Labor backbenchers, the Transport Minister, I think, announcing that if the troubled airline wrecks and its receivers, if they can't find a buyer, we, the taxpayer, might all end up owning an airline. That'll be the first time since Qantas got sold. Now, why is this a potential election hint? Well, what better way to hit the Nationals and the Libs over the head than with the idea that their regional airports and the planes that might land at them might start going dark if Albo, the champion of the bush, doesn't step in and save all those voters' links to capital cities around the nation. How kind of him.
Rex is an incredibly important airline. Now, we want to see the acquisition of Rex. The administrators are looking at that, but we want to also declare that we simply aren't going to allow these communities to be left with no aviation access.
And this is all about the election. Governments have no place using taxpayers' money to become airline operators. And I strongly believe it will never happen, but it's a handy promise to make in the shadow of polling day. And taking taxpayers' money, and lots of it, hint number 3. It involves $2.2 billion, a big chunk of change. And what's that for? Well, it's going to be poured into Melbourne's underground train line, costed, and I use that word loosely, costed at an eye-watering $34.5 billion to connect 2 suburbs with a 26-kilometre long tunnel. Now, Canberra has been stalling on tipping this money into the project for years because Infrastructure Australia was not satisfied with the business case. But again, there are federal seats along the passage of that underground train that Labor wants to hang on to. You ask why suddenly has it changed, that the money's suddenly now available? Well, Infrastructure Minister Catherine King said yesterday the hold-up was over the department, and that's now they're satisfied that it can work.
2.2, which was the election commitment we made, Infrastructure Australia and my department have now provided me with advice on the assessment of their the project proposal report, which is pretty routine. That's what I do, and that's now been released.
And she went further, promising another more funding, a whopping $11.5 billion, was being considered. Now, the loopy Victorian state government welcomed the funding with this amazing quote. The suburban rail loop minister, someone called Harriet Shing, is calling the train tunnel a housing project. Not a train tunnel, a housing project. She called it Australia's largest housing project. I mean, seriously? The justification for that wild claim, build this tunnel and stations above it, developers will suddenly build houses, great. But when will anyone be able to catch one of these trains to their new house above the station? 2035 if you're lucky. 10 years from now, seriously. There we have it. Ducks in a row, with more to come. Independents seduced. Regional voters promised planes, and Victorians handed $2,100 million for a train line most people in Australia will never use. I smell an election, I reckon it's just around the corner.